the Forest Preserve, how that came about is that the original idea, and Chet was involved, it was the chamber, and that it was a good idea to have a park district. And that's where this all started. Sure. Made a lot of sense, and we wanted to have the nuclear power plant involved with that. It could tie in with the school well. The problem was our first attorney, that was the attorney for the Chamber of Commerce, ended up misfiling the papers with
I'd like to mention his name, Joe Long.
No, I'm not mentioning names.
I'm mentioning his name because I'm mad at him yet.
And then we didn't hear anything back for a while. During that time, somebody in Oregon, through some word of mouth, said Byron filed for a park district, and they didn't file properly.
So you think they started it up,
so then
knowing that they might have an opportunity to?
Well, they did.
They did.
Yeah, they ran in and did it.
It wasn't just like two people going at the same thing at the same time.
No.
Okay.
No.
Trevor, we must have had a dozen court hearings,
Okay.
and most of them in front of Judge Cargaman, who eventually made the decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then they came back, they filed, then they told us we filed wrong.
Okay.
And as it turned out, we did file wrong.
Okay.
We had another attorney involved. Now, this is probably too late anyway, to try to revise it. He made some errors that were minor, but enough that the judge threw ours out and gave it to Oregon.
Okay.
So we were trying to decide what to do.
This all happened in early 1980 or right in the middle of 1980?
In 1980, more of the springtime.
Okay.
So then I thought, well, let's give it one last try, and I'll talk to Jim Keeling, who's we had used and I knew personally, and Jim, is there anything else we can do? He reviewed it, basically said, you can do things, you can file, but you're probably going to lose, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. And the chamber didn't have that. So I left. Their office was downtown Rockford. Was driving back the back way, and I see this sign, Severson Dells Forest Preserve. And we'd taken our kids there and walked around. I thought, man, I wonder what a forest preserve is, and how do we, is this something that we could work with the park district? So I got a little more educated, called Jim up and said, what do you think? Is this something we got a chance of doing? So he did some research and said, yeah, because most of them are county-wide,
Right.
and we just
Right.
wanted to have it small. And as I remember, I think there was maybe one other district in the state that had less than county. So we got back together with the chamber and Chet and Blaine and I think Bob Gosdick maybe.
What Ben is telling you sounds very simple today, but it was extremely complicated because there were none of these things.
Sure.
We had to use our imagination.
I bet.
There was nothing out there.
Yeah.
I
And they
bet.
had no association
Yeah.
for Forest Preserve separate.
Yeah.
Only the Park District Association was formed.
Okay.
And they were
Sure.
well-oiled.
Yeah.
And then,
So there was a lot of phone calls, and we said, okay, let's do it. And the original vision was that the Forest Preserve would be able to provide some things that the Park District couldn't,
Sure.
as like a golf course or trails for cross country
I gotta take a pill.
or baseball, whatever. And so the decision was to go ahead. We had Jim file the papers. And then really the hardest part then, it was you've got to get an election to approve. Well, this was a whole new concept of a forest reserve. Nobody really had much idea.
Right.
So it was a lot of education, a lot of going to Lions clubs and speaking at a library and at wherever somebody would let us speak. And we divided up,
Yeah.
Chet, and then we had committees. You tried to have head of a committee for each neighborhood. And anyway, there's a lot more work than it sounds.
Oh yeah, well looking at your timeline, I think you had to switch gears somewhere in August of 1980, and then the election was in October of 1980. Yeah. And so you're educating all these people in the whole district in 4 months. I mean, that's an incredible feat. I don't know how you'd do it, especially without social media these days.
The opposition was the fact that you're going to raise our taxes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, tell me more about that story. What do you mean they're going to raise? Oh, like that's
no one understood the value of the nuclear plant.
Okay, exactly. I'm sure. So that was your biggest opposition.
Oh yeah, it's like, well, if I asked you, do you want your taxes raised? You're going to say no.
Right. Exactly.
Nobody wants. But so the idea was explaining how the nuclear plant could benefit the area. And some people say, yeah, that's what you say now, but it'll never work. But we were able to convince enough people that, and I think a big help there was Chet and Blaine, who were very well trusted and known in the community. I was a new kid.
Sure.
But they weren't, and that helped get the momentum behind it. And the election passed, not by as much as we thought.
That's right.
I think, as I remember, it was around 57-43, roughly for both of them.
Right.
So now we thought, okay, now we have the election passed. What do we do next? So Chet and I got together. And my interest was in the Forest Preserve because of my background with my father, and Chet's interest was the Park District, and that we would be better off separating the two boards, our direction. So the next big step in the Forest Preserve is, because we were less than county, then it had to be appointed by the county board. You didn't have an election. The county board had to approve it. And so we talked to people who had a strong interest. Doc Jarrett obviously won, and others, Barb Lucon, that would be interested in being on the board. And I can remember having the meeting at City Hall, and I had a little politics explained to me of how things work as a new kid on the block, and but that's okay. I needed that advice, and so then the county board approved the first board.
Was that hard to do? Or did they? Was the county board were they ever like, well, why don't you just do it for the whole county? Why are you doing it just for Byron? Did you have any of that?
I don't think that issue ever came up.
I don't ever recall that issue ever.
But recognize they didn't know anything about forest preserves either.
Sure.
Yeah.
So no, I don't. Basically, it was working with our representative on the county board, and basically what I was told, which is the truth, if they approve it, then it will get approved. But then there was a sort of a re-education of that person of what we were doing. And then once he recommended it, I just thought it would automatically happen. But there was, let's say that was a little more difficult than it might seem.
Okay.
And I learned a few things. So then the next step, after we formed and file the proper papers with the state, and then the next step was to get a director. And I can remember we were down at the school. They let us use some offices, which was very nice. And I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 candidates that applied that we interviewed.
I figured I was the only one.
Or you'd never have gotten a job.
Well, as I remember, there was one other. There might have been 2, but I know there was one other. But Jack obviously had the best credentials and the background.
So the board is formed and approved, and then you hire your first employee, Jack Philbrick.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Now, I don't remember. That was several months after it was formed. And we wanted to make sure we had papers filed, so we actually would get money, and and obviously had an attorney helping us getting everything filed properly, so that we could get. And then Jack, once he came on, was used to how to do those things, and educated everyone on proper procedures for a forest preserve, because we didn't know.
So you had know what a forest preserve is. Was it a foreign concept?
Well,
to you, like these guys, or was it?
I had been in conservation for about 15 years, and through political influences, they wanted me transferred to a site which was 130 miles, Carlinville, Illinois, to remodel it. And I had finished one site for them, and I had only 3 state parks. And then all of a sudden I had 20, and I was traveling day and night. An article was in the Register Star, I believe, and one of my relatives saw it, that Byron had formed a forest preserve. Well, I'd worked with forest preserves before, but not here. And I read it, and then I came down and visited 2 of my friends in Byron. One of them had moved to Rockford, Dr. Glenn, and his wife. He was a psychiatrist. And then I came down and met with an outstanding chiropractor in the area and his wife, and we had gone to Japan together, and I discussed it with him, what was going on. Well, I was making about $30,000 at the time, which, by the way, was excellent salary. And but I was traveling day and night. My girls were growing up, and my wife said, "It's your decision. You make the moves." And I offered to come to work for them for half price, and they hired me. To get an example of what occurred when we first hired, they had done so much good groundwork in selling the people that there were a couple of conditions that had been kind of placed on 1 or 2 of the board members. Now, Doc Jarrett was wonderful. I loved the man, and
he was a psychiatric veterinarian.
He interviewed me pulling a calf at Nancy McLaughlin's farm.
I didn't know there was one of those.
Well, he was shocked that I knew how to do it. And my father owned farms, and he had general stores. And I had worked on the farm a lot. My background was I was an administrator in Minneapolis Park System for Revenue, which is a huge system. And even in those days, it was over $10 million in my budget. But that was all revenue other than taxes. Mm-hmm. Then I was the administrator for the Rockford Park District for 3 years under a contract to build an ice rink and a couple of other things, a trolley and a boat and some other. And I was really getting tired of driving.
Yeah.
My last job with conservation, when they gave me the 20 state parks, was investigative auditor. And we had problems. Oh, God, every one of them. We even had men go to jail while I was in that office because of their corruption. And it was under the Thompson administration, and I happen to know most of them. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. I'm a certified conservationist, and here I am doing political work. Mm-hmm. And I came down and asked for an interview, and they subsequently hired me. One of their problems was that they did a hell of a job getting it organized. But right off the bat, they were so excited that they went out, and first thing they did was lease 80 acres from Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they didn't walk.
We were a little giddy.
they didn't walk the property. Half of it was a cyanide dump.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that was just a lease?
Well, I started building the lower 40, a forest preserve for them. It was nice. We had kids out there. We had honey. I put in bees, and all this stuff. Apple cider. Would come to find out the trees had cyanide in the apples. But we found it out early.
Sure.
And we got rid of it.
Yeah.
But then the whole board kind of unified under Doc to not cross the river. So we had to find a piece of property on this side. Well, he took me everywhere. And he knew everybody. In fact, the Hogans, my God, we're out in the middle of the Hogan property. He's walking me around and driving around in his truck or car.
Uh-huh.
And here comes Buck. And Buck's ready with, hell, he's got a gun with him. Well, it was the show and tell. But I said, what are you doing on my damn property? All this stuff.
We're going to buy it.
But it was one of the prime locations. It had passive flower.
Uh-huh.
I mispronounced.
Sure.
But it worked. We found this site. This site had more accessibility to us than any other. And about that same time, the highway department decided they were going to modernize the bridge. And they needed some of this site, which we had already negotiated for. And it was the start of a good relationship with them.
The farmer that owned this site was a sheep shearer. What was his name? He lived in the house right down.
I've got to apologize.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of strokes and I don't have a good memory. But I'll remember it.
But he made his life
as I'm walking out.
shearing sheep.
But his wife actually owned it.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make a fortune out of it. And the board rightly just postponed negotiating, but he found that we were interested.
Mm-hmm.
And it came in parcels. We didn't get it all from one. Et and I got a little piece.
Yeah.
We always were looking at bucks, but we kept our mouths shut because he'd shot me. But it ended up that this had more prairie indicators than everything except the property that was recently acquired with the cottonwood tree.
Okay. Bald Hill.
Yeah, that one had some indicators, but we never went over the slope.
Okay.
I never knew there was a tree down there.
Sure.
But, and we also looked at up like Severson Dells, there's a piece of property you got up there. Oh, we wanted it, but wrong side of the river.
Mm-hmm.
So we stuck to that. The way we designed this facility was a little unique. We had a man on the school board that was superintendent, Bill Brown.
And wasn't he on the board here?
He was on our board.
Yeah.
And Doc told me
He wasn't on the first board.
No, not on the first one.
Okay.
No,
He was on a later board.
you're right.
Yeah.
But Doc says, he's got a PR ability. He's a real, well, they call him a con artist.
Yeah.
And he says, I want you to draft up a sketch of what you foresee for this site and give it to him and let him present it to the board. Well, I just took a piece of paper, half the size of that board back there, and I really quickly sketched this area for a golf course, which I felt you had to have a revenue producing facility. And then the rest of it was prairie, which Doc was all for. And I handed that to him, and it's on file here. And he came to a board meeting, and Bill flamboyantly presented
I'd say that.
his ideas for this future.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, they bought it, and we ended up building it.
Awesome.
And it was a pleasure. This prairie, by the way, was seeded by buying seed from Boy Scouts. And we had to stay within 2 counties, and they would go down the railroad tracks and collect it for us.
Okay.
Big Blue at that time was going for about $26 a pound. We ended up paying the Boy Scouts about $6 a pound, and we seeded this by hand. And you can tell what came out of it.
Yeah.
We did pretty good.
Yeah. That's funny that $26 a pound it might be a little bit more than that, but that's pretty similar price to the seed today.
Yes, there's
For
farms
Big
now.
Blue anyway.
You've got farms producing it.
Sure.
And,
Right.
and of course, we could produce it too. But
As a side issue of the bridge is they had the bridge proposed originally, and there was no bike path or walking path.
Okay.
And no, they weren't going to do that. Now that's too expensive. Then we pointed out that in Dixon, They had just done that in Dixon.
Okay.
3 years before.
Right, just before.
Yeah, and I brought pictures here. You did. Oh, no, we never do that. We never. Well, here you just did it.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, you kept going to the meetings, and towards the end, the drawing had a bike path.
And it's the only snowmobile with qualified crossing on a state highway in Illinois
Sure.
to today.
Okay. So this happened before the site was acquired?
No, we had acquired one piece.
Okay.
Yeah. But it was really almost a separate
Sure.
issue to get the bike path and the walking paths.
Right.
And the idea was then it would tie.
Absolutely. Tie recreation from the city right
Yeah.
into.
Yeah. But it was, a whole different group of people that,
Sure.
or pretty much a group of people.
Sure.
Pat Octalis was one that went with me and worked on it.
Oh, this board was very flexible. Well, time was in our favor. We were getting pretty close to 90% of our revenue from the assessment on the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And the plant decided to sue back against the school board in Oregon to lower the assessment. Well, we all joined together, if you remember that.
Yeah.
And we negotiated with them a 10-year agreement.
Intergovernmental Agreement Board.
Okay.
And it worked out much better to I think we ended up at nearly 97%
Oh,
of our.
yeah.
Now it's down, of
Right
course.
now it's about 70.
Yeah, it's dropped a lot, but-
of our total EAV.
But the whole concept of the prairie here was because of the soils and what we found. And my background being so heavy in revenue resources, that I felt because of the Byron plant being our main source, I always did back the idea of at least one good revenue producer.
Yeah.
But it had to be justified. We had the best deal you could want. We had a county with only one 18-hole golf course. And our biggest objector to building the golf course was a man who owned a 9-hole course. Today, it's an 18-hole course. He claimed we'd put him out of business.
Silver Ridge was not 18 holes at that
It was
time.
originally 9.
Okay.
But he made money because we opened
Sure.
up the attraction to Rockford.
Okay.
We figured with demographics that we did, that we needed to steal 10% from non-residents. We could survive on 30,000 rounds a year in those days easily and have a nice course. By the time we got done, we were up to as high as 42,000 rounds.
Sure.
The course, to my knowledge, has never broke even. I think it's always paid for itself. And that's exemplary of what happens when the tax rate changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's still holding its own.
Yep.
So when you went to filing with the park district, this is back. You didn't get it. Oregon got the park district first, right?
Yeah.
And now you continue on with the Byron Park District.
And we hired this attorney from Rockford to file and we were first, way first, but the filing that he did was inaccurate. It was not right. And Oregon found out about that, and they quickly filed on top of us. And then we ended up in court for a year. Ben was,
Well, less than a year,
Yeah,
but it was
And,
close to that.
Okay.
I felt I was in court more than I was in my business because I was out in Oregon. It seemed like every other week.
Sure.
But in the end result, the judge ruled that they had they had the right to take it, and they did, which in essence is probably all right because that's the only thing they've got. And today, their park district is subsidizing their school district. They have an intergovernmental agreement. So in reality, that was good for Oregon. At the same time, Bill Young, who was then superintendent of our school, and I was president of the park board at that time. We wrote the first intergovernmental agreement here, which is basically still in effect over there now. Which is really a good thing. Yeah.
Sure.
Unfortunately, they were talking about people stepping on toes, which I was good at. Bill Young and I had a falling out. And Bill was really wanting the Forest Preserve to do more than what we were doing with him. And one of the problems, the difference between a park district and a forest preserve is all in statutory declaration. Forest preserves can spend at least 10% on recreation. Park districts can spend 90%. It's the reverse for preservation and acquisition. Forest preserves, 90% must go to preservation. That's one of the reasons that Bill and I fell out. He wanted me to give him a little bit more than what I felt we could. And luckily, it was, well, he wanted free golf.
Oh, sure.
He also wanted me to monetarily maintain his campus.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I maintained at the request of the board a park for the city. And that was a nice little government agreement. I don't know if it's still in effect, but they built a fire department on it and a library. And it got it so small that it was hard for me to transport in town from out here. And I just yielded, and I guess they took over their own. And they never got mad at me. But Bill got mad at me.
Yeah.
I just couldn't
Bill
bring
Young
it to
was
the
a
board.
brilliant man.
Well, I couldn't, oh yeah,
Yeah.
but I couldn't bring it to the board, that's
No,
why.
right.
But Chet, tell him a little bit about how you started with the park district and built that up and
Well,
with the school.
for a long time, of course, we didn't have any money at all. We couldn't afford a director. Did
Yeah,
Bruce
we
come
had
about the same time you did?
$20,000 one year.
Did Bruce come the same time you did?
Yes.
Well, Bruce came after me,
Okay.
but not very long after.
So
but right after.
we, as the board, ran the initial. Of course, there was no rec center or anything like that. And
So
then
you had 0 employees, just a volunteer board.
Yeah, right. We ran the thing for several years, and then eventually, through the intergovernmental agreement and the fact that we were getting a little bit of money, we hired the same time he was hired. We hired Bruce Armstrong to be the park district director, and the history of the park district, from my standpoint, is very, very good. I was on the board for about 12 years. The board continues. They continue to do a good job. The intergovernmental agreement is still in effect. I think they're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, was there a separate vote for the park district and all the other taxing districts? All at separate
every
times?
district was separate.
separate times,
Well, except the Forest Preserve and the Park District were voted on at the same time.
Okay.
Oh, that'd be all right. You're right, Ben. Yeah.
They were.
Right.
They were. When we did the speeches, everything we did, those were done.
You did them both, yeah.
We did. Those were both done at the same time.
Okay. So
And there was one vote. Two separate items to vote
Okay.
on, but both voted on at the same time.
and both like around 57%.
As I
So,
remember.
Okay. That's that's pretty good that they got 2 of them through, and like some
Becky
people didn't just
Little
say-
and I are working on trying to resurrect some of this history too, about who was a board member when and all that
Sure.
sort of thing. Becky, of course, still employed by the high school and was the secretary for the park district at that time.
Okay.
So,
And
so
me.
she's a very
And me.
valuable asset.
yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, she worked for both of
That's
us.
right. That's right.
And
Yeah.
she chose to go with the park district. You could
Sure.
tell I stepped on her toes too.
So at this point, you've only been here for 5 years, but you're pretty invested in the community. You're putting all this time into, I mean, outside of your normal work hour, I don't know how you do it to go out and educate all these people, and then to be an
Well, it's
advisor.
a
on
good
the
thing
board.
Ben and I were in business so we could get away. a little
Yeah,
bit.
I mean,
Well,
are you here for good? I mean, to be doing all this community work for the community that you've only
I
been
know.
here
It's
for
just
5 years.
it really meant something to us. The town. This is where we were planning on staying. We were hoping it'd work out, but we had small kids, so we also had. When we moved here, we had twins that were 6 months old, and we had the other daughter that was 2. So I was probably taking time away that I should have been at home some, but no. But I got in with the right people that really. Well, this isn't exactly, but I want to tell the story because I thought it was so, and I think this was. I'm not sure whether this was before the Forest and Park District or after. I think it was after. So we decided that, okay, the library really needed to get involved with it, and have the nuclear power plant as part of its base. So Blaine and Chet and I went to the meeting, and I think Chet did the most of the presentation, and he was talking, and he was the most well-known and knew a lot of the people, and this is what you need to do. And very, very well done, very logical, makes sense. And they said, we're not sure about it. How much is the election going to cost? And I don't remember the number, but I think it was like $12,000, which at that time was a big deal because we were all making I think I was making 18 or something like that.
Right.
And Chet piped up, well, if it doesn't pass, the three of us will pay for it. Well, I was sort of the young kid on the block here. And Chet just looked at me, we'll pay for it. Well, 3 days later, we get a letter from their attorney signing a note for 1/3 of the cost of the...
Okay.
Now, on the other hand, there were some really motivated people.
I bet, to get that one passed. Which is another tough job because you're coming to the community and say you want this taxing district and this taxing district and this taxing district, and it's like they're getting hit bang, bang, bang.
Yeah.
So to educate them and for people to be...
This was a farmer culture attitude.
Yeah.
The everything you did here was affected majority by farmers' attitude.
Yeah, right. Trevor, if I might, and I know this isn't about the museum, but the museum was different, and I thought the museum building, the one on the corner of the Reed House, had a restaurant in it forever.
Okay.
And all of a sudden it closed up. And a couple of weeks after that, at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, I stood up and I said, folks, I think we have a chance to do something here to buy this building. I think they wanted $39,000. Is that what they wanted?
I don't remember the number.
But anyway, I said to the chamber members there, we need to come up with some money. And that day, that group came up with $13,000. Wow. 13 members each came up with $1,000 and put it in the pot. And that's how we acquired the Reed House.
Okay.
And then we found out that there was no museum districts in the state of Illinois that weren't under the auspices of a town.
Okay.
So that was quite a battle that we had to fight, but we did, and we successfully passed that referendum in 1990.
Okay.
Prior to that, once again, the board was running the thing. We were having fundraisers. We had to make the payments.
Right.
We were having fundraisers and having various things going on so we could get a few bucks, and it was a grand time, really. It really was. But in 1990, which is the same time as the county board election, we successfully created the museum district by the voters.
Okay.
And it's still, I think, to this day,
You're the only one.
the only museum district in the whole state that stands alone.
Wow.
All the rest of them are
City
under a town. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Realize there's so many different levels that you can have the same thing, that they overlap. But like Rockford has a county forest preserve, Rockford has a park district, Rockford has a nature center district. There's all types of levels that each can share, but the intergovernmental agreement is a secret.
Sure.
A lot of people don't know about it.
And that's all.
That's when you can cooperate with
And
it.
the museum district does have the nuclear plant.
It's the people that make up that the relationships that you build. Would you say that to get those to work, right?
Well, a good example of how we could legally, we gave you an exhibit at the museum. For years, well, I think it was like 3 or 4 years, we had a train exhibit.
That great big train?
Mm-hmm. We hired a man to miniaturize Byron. Byron has a fantastic milk train history. They're one of the 3 cities that furnished milk to Chicago, solely for Chicago, that kept a train running every day of the week with milk cans. Loaded them at 6 a.m., unloaded at 6 p.m. And they went to Chicago with milk. Well, we miniaturized the city and made an exhibit out here for an attraction. Well, it was obvious that, you're past your due time. it was obvious that we couldn't afford to leave that here forever. It was too big, and it wasn't germane enough to maintain. We gave it to them. We could legally, under an agreement, give them that, but we couldn't sell it. It's a weird statute, but intergovernmental agreements allow you to take care of those subjects on occasion.
Sure.
Well, change that. One thing I want to make sure I get in here, and so you're aware of it for nothing else, is the Forest Preserve not only has the Byron School District, it has another section of land in that district, which is where if they would add a units 3 and 4.
Okay.
Blaine Ocker worked and helped buy a lot of the land for it.
Yes.
So he had seen the plans.
Okay.
Now, at that time, it seemed like a high likelihood that they would build 3 and 4.
Sure.
So that land, and I'm not sure, I don't remember now what district. Forest Preserve was the first one that had that. And some of the others, we included it. I don't remember which
You
it
added
was.
it?
Well, I actually included it when, I think the library was done second, but just so people are aware, if you see a little jog out there by the
Gotcha.
power plant,
On the property boundary?
the property boundary, that does not match the school district.
Okay.
And
I didn't know that.
and that is their, that's where,
Proposed site for-
that was, now, many years ago, that was proposed. So we wanted to make sure we
Sure.
had that if they built 3 and 4. And at that time, it appeared they
Well,
would.
okay.
3 and 4 was talked about up until, I think, probably Chernobyl.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
That,
And Trevor, if Blaine Ocker was alive, he would be sitting right here too, because he was very much involved
he helped us.
in all of these formations.
Sure.
He was invaluable because he knew everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And also, he had a big influence with the farmers, too.
Right. Oh, yes.
more
Did he
so
ever?
than Doug Trevor.
Yeah.
Do you know where that the jut out for 3 and 4 is geographically?
It's right across the street from where the plant is.
Okay. Okay.
I'd forgotten where it was. I remember it was in.
It's right across the street.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So, I mean, the likelihood of that happening now is probably low.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when it comes back to educating and voting for this, what was or who, whether it's a group or was your biggest opposition? And what was some of the things that you had to overcome, I guess, when it was trying to educate people about starting up the Forest Preserve?
No, I think the only real opposition was they're afraid we were going to raise their taxes.
Yeah,
You know?
that was,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't say it was one group.
Yeah.
Well, I would say there was tended to be more opposition from the
They
older
didn't
people.
understand the concept of the assessed valuation and what the nuclear plant was
Okay.
going to do for us.
Very few people
And try as we might, it was
trained.
hard to get them convinced.
But I think we got enough convinced, but there were some that just they weren't going to listen no matter what.
Right.
But we.
But Trevor, we never had any vocal opposition.
No.
Opposition.
Okay.
We didn't
There
have
were no-
anybody
no-
walking
nobody
around with
organized.
signs or
Sure.
anything like that. There were people who were kind of passive or weren't interested, probably voted no, but they didn't fight us.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And we used some of the techniques because before then, I don't remember when, then Barb Lucon and I were on the committee to get the referendum passed for building the high school.
Okay.
And in that case, the school had money to hire an advisor.
Okay.
And so they would tell us how you organize, how you do the car, how to do it.
Right.
Well, in the Forest and Park District, we didn't hire them. We didn't have any money to buy them back, but
Right.
we used the same techniques
Right.
that,
Sure.
that we'd use there. And are they a little? Well, obviously they're designed for you to win the election. So
yeah.
you try to bring out the people that are going to vote for it, and if the other people show up, fine. If they don't,
Right.
fine.
So I gotcha. So do you off the top of your head, do you remember what a voter turnout looked like back then? Or I mean, that's something we can look up easily. Probably
Don't
on county.
forget, we were a very small community.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Voting wise, we didn't have 500 registered voters when the Forest
Yeah.
Preserve was formed.
Sure.
Yeah,
That's
I
how
don't
many
remember.
farmers is
I don't remember.
Right, right.
But
Yeah.
that's why you would have someone for each neighborhood
Right.
that was a strong advocate, and then that was their responsibility to get the voters that were in
Right.
favor of it
Right.
to remind them and maybe give them a ride to the polls. And I mean, that's just part of that's just
Right.
part of it. There's nothing underhanded about everybody does it.
Right. Right.
Now, Doc, while he was alive, on his own, I don't think he included Chet and Ben, but tried to get Stillman Valley to annex into the Forest Preserve. Did he ever come to you with that?
No.
Sure.
Oh, I tell you, he drove me bad. I had to work here. He'd send me over there to speak to a teacher or somebody he thought that was interested. Obviously, he'd taken care of their cows or something, and they were not interested in joining us. They just weren't. And yet it would have been beneficial to them.
Yeah.
You know, one time we had a teacher here named Cotter, and his brother was superintendent of schools down at Marseille or whatever it was. Bill Young and I, the superintendent of school, and I was president of the park board then, went down there and spoke to their whole board and told them what we had done here and how well it had worked out and everything happened. They never did a thing.
Okay.
They never took advantage of anything.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, you guys are seeing that. I mean, your major selling point here was that the nuclear plant is going to provide all this value, or provide the monies to fund a lot of the stuff that
Well, and in
these
our
districts can
case,
do.
in Forest Preserve case, that was loaded the right way. If you could acquire your land that you wanted, it didn't matter as the depreciation occurred if you didn't overload yourself with expensive side projects. And there was one side project that I've observed since we left, that one director wanted a recreation program, and he spent a lot of money on recreation that didn't have a justification.
Mm-hmm.
That was his problem. He didn't do he probably didn't know how to do a feasibility study, but he was a nice man, don't get me wrong. But his interest was recreation more so than preservation.
Sure.
Or I am told that. That's hearsay.
I get it.
Well, as long as we're talking about a little history, I need to insert that without the Byron Bank and Bud Thompson, a lot of things would not have happened too. I would like that on a record.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Bud Thompson.
That's my father-in-law.
Okay. Gotcha. And it was the Byron Bank. When did that start up?
Well, I
That's been
figured Chet
established.
threatened them all that he wouldn't repair their goddamn toilets. But
Actually, it was First National Bank of Byron
Okay.
when I came here,
Okay.
and then
Ben came here with an engineering background. No one thought he could be a banker, and he's turned out wonderful.
well, I did have my master's in business, so but when I moved to the plant I worked at Winchester had 5,000 employees, and Byron
was
probably
that Alton?
East Alton.
I was superintendent of parks and recreation down there.
So when I go to work, there was not all more there at the same time because you had shift work, and then you came to Byron and it was maybe 1,500. I'm guessing, I don't remember. So it was but it fit in with what Gail and I grew up with. It was about the size of town, and so my parents were always involved in community things. Dad, of course, more forestry,
Right.
and my mom was all kinds of other things. She donated her time, so I was used to that.
Did you take your pill?
So,
Yes.
that was just sort of expected
It
if
just
you were
15
part of that.
minutes late.
And we were the old timers,
Just 15 minutes late.
old timers there.
That's
and
Lacey.
so it's just finally what you did.
Sure. I got one more specific guided question, I guess, and that's a little bit about the mission of the Forest Preserve District. So right now the mission is preservation, preservation, education, recreation, and kind of in that order. That's kind of our priorities. Was that the priorities back then, and when it first started, and how do
Our
you
first mottos?
and how do you come up with your first mission? Is it the board? Is it
Well, the board has to approve of everything.
sure?
One of the things that a good director, and I don't know if I was, but I enjoyed it, is that you pleasurize from qualified and outstanding sites. I kept my contacts. Just discovered that he and I have both lived in Alton, Illinois. I was with Winchester as a franchise consultant, and until the Frenchman bankrupted. And I became the first director in Alton, Illinois. And we inherited the mental illness hospital. 500 acres was given to the park department. And we ended up building a Palmer golf course, 18-holer, for nothing, Nellie, because of the way we statutorily worked with other governmental agencies to get the hospital. But long and the short of it, if you know other places that do things right, you pleasurize it. There's nothing to be secret about the fact that our rules and regulations I pleasurize from the Rockford Park District and Minneapolis Park System. And didn't pleasurize too much, but on horticulture from Alton. But Alton had a tree program, Ben. I don't know if you remember it. It was called Pride Incorporated. It's national now. And we did street trees that wouldn't grow into the top wires, and everything. Every time a big oak died, we'd put in a little short tree that wouldn't grow. Well, that whole idea was a concept for our memorial garden here. Now, I've got to admit, it's not being utilized anymore, but many units have copied us.
Sure.
Rockford has a memorial tree garden that is just gorgeous on one of their pieces of land. And if somebody passes away, you can donate a tree to it. And it's going like a house of fire in other places.
Sure.
Now, it's not here, but it was here. The reason it's not going here is that you've got so much more concentration on development. You're getting all these lands, you've got a lot of work on your hands, so you can't concentrate on little things.
I would say my original concept was more, the only forest preserve in Illinois I'd gone to was at Severson Dells. And we'd taken the kids out and walked around.
That's
It's pretty.
good.
So my vision when we started is something like Severson Dells.
Sure.
And where you've got the house and you bring, like the kids in and they would have the Girl Scouts and boy. That was all I had to go on.
Sure.
And then the preserving forest land, I thought, well, we'll be able to do that too. But that was sort of like forest. Now that's not a huge area, but it's very well done. I thought, and that was more what I envisioned.
Sure.
And then also I envisioned at the time that of a golf course, but I was also envisioning that you would have some baseball diamonds and the school would have, and those type of things. That didn't happen, and logically it shouldn't have happened. But that was sort of what I was thinking at the time that we would have.
With the right agreement, they can do it, though, to some degree.
Sure. So then this building here, what year did this building come in? And then was that, I guess with this,
well, I think we started.
I guess not necessarily this building, but the first building that you could have brought people to provide some education.
Well, that was
like
a school property because we used them.
Well, and then the first building was out at Hilo, the ComEd property, and there was a house there.
Okay.
And you had brochures. And
what we did was the 80 acres that they leased had a farmhouse on it with a little garage underneath it, and we brought kids out there, and we had a fine Ranger Rick program. You've got probably 20 times as many programs as we had, but we could have honey making. By the way, we have our own apple cider plant.
Sure.
You can press all you want here. By the way, people really wanted our apples because ours were not sprayed. Therefore, they had protein in them. And they thought our cider was a little dark. Well, worms squish up dark. And boy, it was good cider. The first year we did it, we sold 200 gallons.
Okay.
That was a big thing for us. You know?
Well, to show you the kind of world I grew up in is my father was an outdoorsman and grew up on the farm, and I can remember with my dad, and we would hunt bees, and you would go out in the summer on a glade, and you'd leave some water, sugar water with sweet anise. I'm not sure why you use sweet anise, but that's what you did.
It works.
And then you've heard of a bee line, so the bees would head towards their tree.
Okay.
So I'd yell at Dad, "Here comes one," and then Dad would keep heading more that direction. So then you'd try to get 3 angles,
Okay.
and then you could, you get close to tree, you can hear the humming.
Okay.
And when the Southern Missouri, this was the honor system. If you then put your initials on the tree, that was your
Okay.
that was your
Your
tree.
hive.
Okay.
And then didn't matter if it was on your land or not. No, really. But the understanding is then you get a group of guys and pick up trucks and 5-gallon buckets, and some of them in the bee suits, and you go out in the fall
Okay.
when it's cool.
Okay.
And they smoke, and then people would carry the buckets, and you gave about a quart of it to whoever owned the land.
Okay.
So they, you tell them, I've got it marked. We're gonna, and there was no set rule.
Right.
They were just, but
Interesting.
to actually go out and hunt.
Wow. That's crazy.
Now there were a lot of bees down there. Now there are not as many now as there used to be.
Uh-huh.
Back then, that was
Sure.
they were all over.
Yeah.
That's
So
great.
that's a little different world.
Yes, indeed.
An example of what we were stealing from other people because we just didn't have a staff initially is the Weiskopf Observatory. I still went to the round table when I could, when we weren't having problems with the construction on something. And the round table in Rockford included about 30 different park districts and forest preserves and stuff that would show up. And one day somebody came in and said, well, Weiskopf offered an observatory to Webb's to take it out to Longwood Park. Well, we had 2 scopes out there already. And I kind of got a feeling that Webb's didn't want it. So I called Dr. Weiskopf. We heard it from the round table.
Yeah, sure.
That you're giving away. He says, yes, if you can have it out of my yard in 2 days, it's yours. It included a telescope, everything.
Yeah.
He had built it for his children. They had outgrown it for some reason. Man, I'm telling you, Bob Smith and our crew were up there the next day with Charlie Holton. They disassembled that thing and brought it back in a van and a pickup.
Uh-huh.
And they had it down here, and we weren't too sure the board was going to accept it. We had to propose it. They bought it like
Yeah. And that's been a pretty successful program still today.
and you're
Very
on
successful. Very popular.
You're on the 3rd or 4th tallest spot in the county.
And
It's a good location.
there we might be moving it again out to Bald Hill. More so because of some, where the city's kind of growing around us out here. There's a little more light pollution, but Bald Hill provides a better spot. But anyway.
You may not be aware of it, but there's a dedication of this facility to the Nature Conservancy. And in that map, if you ever look at it, there's a strip from outside here all the way down nearly to the river, which was left for a revenue-producing facility. Have you ever heard of Lexon?
Yeah.
A Lexon toboggan run was talked about. Remember at one time we wanted to put a tall building with an observatory at the top or a classroom? It didn't go over very good, but they had a model made of it. The highway department at the same time was putting an observatory out towards Galena on tall poles, and it's demised. But we have a strip of land left open for a Lexon toboggan run. Now, Lexon on Lexon is like glass and ice.
Sure.
And there's one at Pokagon State Park that makes very close to $100,000 profit a year because they don't ice it. It's Lexon.
Okay.
And they don't have to do any maintenance on it except replace a sheet of Lexon
Yeah.
if they need it. and they put runners on the bottom of the toboggans, about 6 of them,
Sure.
of Lexan, countersunk screws, and it attracts people from 4 states.
So
Phenomenal.
you're saying if I look at the Illinois Nature Preserves map of this site, there'll be a strip
There'll be
blocked out that's not Illinois Nature Preserve because you wanted it to be a revenue. you
just
wanted
in
to develop
case.
it.
Just in
Gotcha.
case. It's
Interesting.
there. Well, that's like yours. You know, there's also a location for a marina, which has a very unique possibility. The river here goes east and west. The opening to where they were thinking of putting the marina is right next to the bridge, and it's backwards. So the water flows past it and doesn't do any damage. I have 2 marinas that I was involved in, one in Alton, by the way, which flooded every year. We expected it, but it was in floodplain. But the one in Minneapolis is built that same way. And whenever these terrific floods come, doesn't matter, it's floodplain. The water has a place to go. But it doesn't wash anything out because it's below
Right.
the river flow. You've got a couple of things. When we bought that little strip from Holio for $1,
Yeah.
it was a drainage ditch. But remember, it led right up to the boat club.
Right.
And you guys were aware of it. On the board, you approved us to accept it. We gave them the $1 too, by the way. And now you own the boat club.
Yeah. And now we're developing.
By the way, it's really pretty down there.
Yeah, it is. It's a great preserve, and we're still developing.
Oh, it's going to be ideal for canoeing or rafting.
The mouth there of the Leaf River. We're trying to, and we have some ponds. So there's some spring ponds that weren't there. It was all sedimented in, and it's a great place to take kids out for forest preserves and catch frogs and stuff like that. And it's still a work in progress. And we haven't had a good dry year to get a lot of work done down there yet.
Well, that's the other thing. We were hoping that someday we could dredge a few slips.
Yeah, we're working with the
there's
Fish and
revenue
Wildlife.
backup to you can afford to make money.
Yeah,
I'm in the Verde Club in Rockford. We get $1,000 a year for each of our slips. We have about 24 of them for the club, and we rent them out for $1,000 a year. We put the ramps in ourselves each year and take them out. But boy, I'll tell you, boaters are looking for places to hook up.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And you have no gasoline down here. Where can you get gas for a boat? Oregon?
Yeah. No, I don't know.
I don't think you know.
I don't think so either.
well,
Trevor,
another
I
revenue.
want to mention one little thing because I
I'm
think
off
it
the
shows
subject.
the cooperation between the units. We had the Reed house and the floor was terrible. You could see down into the basement. So we tore it all up and now we decided, what are we going to do? The Forest Preserve donated a dump truck and they donated all the trees. And Jim and I took them to Broadhead, Wisconsin, and turned them all into flooring. And today, if you go into the Reed House, you see the most beautiful floor, all different kinds of wood, every wood imaginable. Every bit of it came from here.
okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's worth looking at.
Well, I mean,
It is.
there's a lot of strong intergovernmental agreements working today with the Forest Preserve, with the Park District, with the school district, and even the city of Byron now. And I think all the districts
Well, you always gotta do one
recognize
at a
how
time.
well
Yeah.
it works to share assets, where it's all for the benefiting the same community. And obviously, it all started with you guys and building those relationships and all that stuff. So
Well, the bike path that's there by the school,
That's right. Oh,
that was, the township did some, the Forest Preserve, Kenny Norb
Combined
did some.
That's a good one.
And Herbig did some.
right.
And then we had donations that we bought things, but a lot of it, and then the school did some. They agreed to keep it mowed and
Right.
and plowed. So everybody worked together. Now once that got in, then the Forest Preserve did, of course, this part out here. And then the city basically got the other part back there. But the original part was all the groups working together.
Yeah, that's great. I don't have any more specific questions. I mean, I could probably sit here and talk to you guys for forever.
Well,
about
we
it,
could
and
do
I
if you want to
we don't
know
have
every
forever.
little detail.
Right. But I think this will be a great start for and we'll be able to make take a lot of good information from this. And
Becky and I get a lot of that information back on the park. Just get it to you.
Sure, and it's just good to have. And again, I really appreciate you guys coming today and sharing your story, and of course doing everything you did back in the 1980s to get this place up and running, and because it's a great asset to have in our community.
Yeah, well, I've got to compliment your board and the boards that have followed mine, that they've done a fantastic job of improving and expanding what should have done and should be done.
Yeah, it was a grand time.
Sure. And
We needed everything, and we had the people that were willing to go and do it. I think we were all excited. We were having fun. It was wonderful.
yeah,
It was a good time.
you guys
Oh,
did
it
a
was
great
a
job.
good time, that's for sure.
Yeah, you guys did a great job.
Except for Bruce Armstrong.
Well, and I didn't pull very many caps either.
It's something that you should realize is not
He
everything
and I
was
are still good
successful.
friends.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We don't talk about the ones that didn't work.
He's in England. He's in England.
There were a lot of things that were started
Sharon.
Yeah.
that, that seemed like a good idea.
Married an English girl.
Or you'd go down this road and then, no,
Yeah.
you couldn't go any farther.